Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started. Hello. My name is Theo Kirkley, and I'm here interviewing Helena Sue Martin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Theo.
I started listening to your podcast on Spotify, and I decided to send you an email, and you graciously responded. We talked a bit, and we even talked on the phone. And I asked you if you wanted to do an interview because I feel like you're in a unique position down there in Australia. You're an American woman who is now living abroad. And yeah, I thought it would be really interesting to talk to you and get to know you a bit. And I think it would be interesting for other people. So here we go. This is my interview with you, Helena. So first question, who are you? Where are you from? Tell us a bit about your background.
So, my name is Helena Martin. I'm 39 years old. I am from the US and I currently reside in Queensland, Australia. I grew up in a tiny little town in Michigan next to a cornfield, one stoplight town. I was the youngest of three sisters, or four daughters. I had three older sisters. And yeah, a safe, physically safe home. We didn't lock the door often. We lived on 14 acres. Both my parents were together the whole time I lived in that home, and I lived in the same home from when I was born till I left. So yeah, pretty stable. And yeah, I just remember wanting to get the hell out of that little town and be cool and go to college and smoke clove cigarettes and go to poetry slams and stuff like that. And so I did leave for University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I did 4 years there. I worked for a year. Then I moved to Georgia, where I got my master's in medical illustration, which is this super niche form of graphic design or art, which focuses on the medical and scientific community, or I guess industry. And then from there, I got a job in Connecticut at a medical animation firm. And that was 2010. And 2012, someone showed me a Divine Truth video on YouTube. Divine Truth being the teachings of a couple here in Australia who claim to be Jesus and Mary Magdalene, like Jesus and Mary Magdalene from the Bible, like from the first century. And I remember watching it and thinking, these people are definitely not Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but they don't seem like bad people. They seem like they believe it, you know? They don't seem like they're trying to pull one over on people. They don't seem like charlatans. And I kind of forgot about it for a while. And then I was in a really, really angry place when I lived in Connecticut, just super pissed all the time. And there was no amount of drugs that would make me less angry long term. And about a year after I got shown that video, I started thinking about it again. So I Googled Australian Jesus, and then I just started watching videos. And I said to myself, this guy may not be Jesus, and she might not be Mary Magdalene, but I really, really like what they're saying, and what they're saying makes perfect sense to me. And that's how my journey started with Divine Truth.
Awesome. Yeah, I find that really interesting. And I don't know if it's appropriate now or later, but do you want to talk a little bit about like your upbringing, like kind of religiously, or like maybe your thoughts
Sure.
and maybe lead in? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a WASP. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And I was raised Presbyterian because on my mother's side, there's Scottish heritage. And Presbyterians, I would say, are very stoic, And my upbringing with church was very low key. It wasn't like some of the Pentecostal Christians I've hung out where they go to church every single Sunday and Wednesday nights they have Bible study, and all of their friends are in church and their families in the same church. It was more low key than that. We could miss Sundays of church. I mean, we did go to church regularly, but it wasn't a big deal if we missed. And
Mm.
I was in the church choir, which I really enjoyed. And when I was very little, I was in the church cherub choir, which was for like 5-year-olds and under. And I remember that was a time where I felt, I think it was probably when I felt the most connected to God, just singing. I never really connected to sermons. I would felt like they were very kind of boring. I'm sure that the ministers at that church were trying their best, but I connected more to music, and I still do. I haven't been to church in a long time, but whenever I have gone to church with, some of my Christian friends, I always connect more to the music. So that's the fondest memory I have of the Presbyterian church I went to. And yeah, I've always thought of God as a man because I was raised Christian, and when you read the Bible, God is referred to as a man. And divine truth, the belief there is that God is not just a man, but also a woman. God has male and female qualities. But in my heart, I don't really see those female qualities. I'm just focused on God being a man. Um, but I would say by the time I was a teenager, I became disenchanted with Christianity because I would read the Bible. I read all of Genesis and Exodus. I remember when I was little, there's a lot of begats in those books. There's a lot of really boring sections. And I read a lot of the Bible. And I just thought, man, there's no cool female characters in this. Like all of the cool stuff that's happening is men doing stuff. They're the leaders, they're the fighters, they're the ones taking action, where the females were maybe like a messenger or a faithful wife or an unfaithful wife. and
Yeah.
and there is this submissiveness of the female to the male in Christianity that I saw at a wedding ceremony once. There was a Baptist wedding ceremony, and a lot of the vows that the couple was going through was about the woman submitting to the wife, and I just thought, I really don't like that. That doesn't seem right. And I got really angry about that because of my own feelings about being a woman and feeling inadequate as a woman were triggered. And so I just went into an angry place, and I just became an atheist for about 10 years. So, I would say probably, yeah, my late teens until my late 20s. I was your typical angry atheist, meaning I was very arrogant and sure that there was no God. But I think in my heart, I knew there was, but I was really hurt by the whole thing. I was really hurt that God seemed to think that women weren't worth as much as men. So in reaction to that, I just decided there's no God at all. Christianity is a sham. All religion is a sham. It's for weak people. And I'm going to just be an atheist now.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, go ahead.
yes, well, so before I found Divine Truth, I was in New York City, and um, I I did some psychedelics, and that kind of popped me out of being an atheist.
Oh, really?
Yes, because I realized obviously there's more to the material world, and so that was a good. I wouldn't recommend psychedelics to anyone, but that helped me kind of be open to the idea of God or a spiritual world. And so by the time years later that I was introduced to Divine Truth, I wasn't as hardened. I wasn't this hardened, angry atheist anymore. I was more open to the idea. So that was helpful, I would say.
Yeah. I kind of want to go on, but I kind of want to go back again. So, like, tell
Mm-hmm.
me your experiences with God, and your feelings about God, because you said even though you became an ardent atheist,
Mm.
you you felt like there was a God. So go into that.
Yeah, I think that one of the good things about being raised Christian in that cherub choir experience was that I was introduced to the concept of God. in the cherub choir, we were singing lots of like really lovely kid songs, and those were, I don't know, like happy and gentle, and as opposed to reading the Old Testament where God's just smiting everybody, you know, just being a jerk. So yeah, so I think I had a belief instilled in me that there was a God. But but I also had a belief because of what I was reading and what I was feeling from the other people at church, probably, and most likely the people in my own home, was that God wasn't very friendly and God didn't really care about me in particular. And yeah, I've had experiences with God, um, less so as an adult. Um, I have I did ask Jesus one time if I received God's love. And he said that he feels like I have, but I'm not sure when that was. Maybe that was when I was a little kid. Maybe it was some of these emotional experiences I had after I found the divine truth. I'm not sure. I just know right now I'm I'm still I'm just now trying to connect with God. I usually just try to ignore God, kind of like, you can't reject me, God, because I already reject you, kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Because I don't, because asking for God's love now is where I'm at now. It triggers a lot of grief about feeling like God actually doesn't just dislike me or have indifference for me, but just like hates me. And I'm not a very humble person, humble in the, not in the traditional sense of the word, but in the divine truth sense of the word, where meaning I'm open to all my feelings. I don't really like feeling feelings. They make me feel weak. Um, Although I've cried my share of angry tears, meaning I've faked grief a lot when I was really just angry. But yeah, so that's just a process I've just been getting into lately. Just I've always preferred more to talk to loving people or even loving spirits as opposed to reach out to God directly. Um, yeah, because of I've made assumptions about how God's going to be and about God's character that are very negative.
Right. Well, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, because it's probably going to be
Mm.
pretty personal. But can you remember one or two times when you did as a child, like when you might have actually had an experience with God?
Yeah, I think it was in the choir again. Mrs. Bobet, shout out to Mrs. Bobet, my choir director. Uh, yeah, and then choir director when I was older too. There was this song, "Here I Am, Lord," that I remember singing and just feeling. It's a song about kind of surrendering to God, you know. I think it's a song about Jesus, but like being called by God to go sacrifice himself, which is wrong. But I felt like it felt more personal. Um, but yeah, I can't remember anything specific, Theo. Most of my childhood's pretty fuzzy. Um, but yeah, I have an inkling or an intuition or a feeling that those are when I had those experiences when I was singing in the choir.
I gotcha. So let's go to, I want to say 2013, when
Yep.
you were like, oh, I'm thinking more about like spiritual stuff.
Hmm.
Wasn't there that one video that this guy showed me? What?
Yeah. So when I did my Google search,
Yeah,
Australian Jesus,
what was your motivation there?
uh, I think it just kept, is the Aussie saying, niggling me. Like it just kept
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
up in my mind. And now I think that someone suggested to me, my friend Eloisa, that was maybe my guides trying to get me back there. And I think that it's because I really like truth. And by truth, I mean, I really like it when people are honest with me. I like to be honest with others. Well, in some situations when I'm scared, I'll sacrifice the truth. So I still have work to do there. But I just like it when people are real. And Jesus and Mary on YouTube, they just keep it so, so real. And it just really resonated with me. And that's part of why I was so angry at that point in my life. Because I've always liked truth. I didn't give up on truth when I was a kid because I wasn't violently punished, fortunately, for being myself and being truthful in my family. So some people are violently punished, like kids will speak up and
Yeah.
they get smacked. And it kind of makes them feel like, okay, I can't be myself. But luckily that did not happen to me. And so I was able to retain my sense of self and my love of truth. And so I think that's what really pulled me to divine truth, even though I thought the whole thing was kind of ridiculous. And yeah, so I started watching the videos and I was just hooked in. I was fascinated. And at that point, my boyfriend at the time had suggested that we move across the country, we leave the animation firm and start a new life in Austin, Texas as artists. And I thought, this is great. And what I'm going to do, I'm also going to give up drinking and I'm going to also stop eating meat, not going vegan, but going vegetarian. And I want to give it a go, this divine truth stuff a go. Because the first thing you learn when you're watching Divine Truth, or what I learned, was that, hey, there is a God, but if you want to get in touch with them, you got to give up your addictions. And by addictions, Jesus and Mary don't mean, shooting up heroin or alcohol, although those are physical addictions, but things that are more subtle, like your addiction to watching Netflix when you're feeling bad, or having a codependent relationship with a girlfriend, or getting angry when people say things you don't want to hear. So, yeah, that's when I decided I wanted to kind of give it a go. Around that time, and then moving across the country, I felt like was a nice segue to that. But yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier about being really angry at that time, part of the reason I was angry was probably, I think there's entitlement. As a Westerner, I have a lot of entitlement. So when people don't give me what I want, I get very angry. But I think the bigger part of it was that because I loved truth as a child, because I had that, and I didn't let go of that. I was very angry that I lived in a society that doesn't honor truth. People, like, we don't live in a world where people are honest or transparent about things. And I was feeling more and more as I got older that I was going to have to fit in with society by being more dishonest. And that really pissed me off. Because I've
Right.
luckily, never been good at lying to myself, but I could feel that I could tell people wanted me to, just to
Yeah.
kind of fit in with society. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to deal with my grief about that. So I was just really angry about how other people weren't keeping it real. So, and that's one of my biggest sins, I would say, is just being really incensed and enraged when people are honest. So that's something I'm going to have to repent for at some point.
When people are dishonest?
Correct.
Okay.
It pisses me off.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
Yeah. So
totally relate to that. Yeah.
mm.
Go ahead, keep going.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, so then I got to Austin and I realized that I didn't really want to give up all my addictions at all. But I practiced with some. I was like, I'll give this up for 6 weeks, and see how it goes. And um it led, like, just different physical addictions, because I was still smoking weed. I'd given up drinking at that point. And the relationship fell apart and I was kind of in a bad spot. I didn't have a car because I kind of had romanticized poverty and I didn't have money. And so I sold my car. I didn't have a car. I was renting a room in Austin. I didn't feel like I really had any friends anymore because I didn't want to smoke weed anymore. And those are the people I used to hang out with. And I had to kind of, yeah, just deal with the consequences of all my shitty choices up until then. And I just listened to Divine Truth like on the down low for several years after that. I just already felt like a weirdo my whole life, and I didn't want people to think I was more weird than I already felt. So I didn't really reveal to many people that I was listening to these Jesus and Mary characters. I was ashamed of it, I suppose. So this
Yeah.
was, yeah, 5 or 6 years. There was an online forum that came out. I got into that, like a Divine Truth forum. Although I feel like I was pretty, I don't know, not super connected to myself with there. And then in 2019, I finally went to Australia for a seminar, and that's where I
In
met Jesus and Mary.
2019, you said?
19. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But you were saying, Theo, that you kind of relate to this truth
Uh,
anger thing.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Do you want me to say more?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry if that wasn't obvious. Yeah, please.
Well, I don't want to talk much about myself, but I'll just say, like, I've realized in the past year, like, I like to like sniff out when people are lying, and I'll pay very close attention. I actually become a kind of detective, and I've called myself in my mind. Maybe I'm talking to my spirit friends or something, but like I'm a detective for truth, but not in a good way. Like
Mm,
I'm a very conniving, like suspicious, like of everybody kind of detective, and I'm always working on the case, but I have no life because I'm always trying to ferret out who's lying. So
hmm.
yeah, that's a big issue for myself as well.
Yeah, it's good for us to look at the sin in it, hey, because I think that up until the last year or so, I've just been feeling like very righteous about being angry about people being dishonest, where I myself hypocritically have been dishonest with people when I feel like it's appropriate. Basically, when I feel like I'm going to get attacked for telling the truth, or I'll like mute myself. I won't really be myself, which is a form of dishonesty. And I, it's not right to be mad at people because they're not acting the way you would act or the way you want them to act. And it becomes like, yeah, you can get obsessive about it, and you can just feel really hard done by, and it just makes you like a grouchy, curmudgeony, or cantankerous person.
Yeah,
And that's a sin, to use a Christian word. It's a big sin, and it hurts people when you fucking project anger at them. I mean, especially when they don't even know what's going on. Like, it's nothing personal. Like, I've had, if you think about, you work with somebody who's just angry all day long because they're having financial problems. It has nothing, so something that has nothing to do with you. It really sucks trying to be on a team with somebody to get a project done because you're just feeling constantly like you're walking on eggshells. And you know, yeah. So to me, it's obvious it's a sin, and I think I've just been in denial, or I felt self-justified in it up until now. But I also appreciate my love of truth because it's brought me to the place I'm at. I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. I think I'm the more moral and ethical I've ever been in a place I've ever been in my life. But now I got to deal with this 20 years of being really angry.
yeah. Well, where I want to go right now is kind of back to 2013, 2014,
Sure.
and you had your first experience really trying to tackle your addictions.
Right. Went
What
poorly.
did that yeah, what did that teach you?
Um, it taught me that, well, one of the things that marijuana does is it suppresses your anger. That's why people do it. They do it for that reason also because they want to feel mothered or taken care of. And so that the first thing I realized was that I'm actually really, really angry. I thought I knew I was angry before that, but like when I was a teenager in my early to mid 20s. But then I started doing like a lot of yoga and smoking a lot of weed. So then I thought that I'd just magically become less angry. But all the anger was still there. So it kind of it revealed all of that anger.
Mm,
And yeah, so I just realized that this was going to be divine truth was going to be really, really hard. And I also realized that, yeah, I did, like, I really love the truth. I couldn't let it go to the truth, but I really didn't like all this emotion stuff, and I didn't like how applying divine truth to my life was gonna feel or look like. And I just felt like divine truth was a big pain in my ass, honestly. And in a way, I guess I'm glad that nobody listened to me during that period about divine truth and I wasn't talking, because they probably think, why would I want to get into divine truth? This chick is miserable and cranky. Like, it doesn't sound like a good spiritual path to me. Yeah, it wouldn't be a good advertisement for divine truth at that point.
Did you ever feel fear emotions?
Yeah, yeah, sometimes. My place got broken into during that time. I think it was, no, that was more 2015 when I moved out. When my relationship had broken up and I got my own place, and um, I wasn't there, and my roommate called me and said the place got broken into, and I just remember I couldn't get my leg to stop shaking. And I thought,
Really?
oh, this is fear. This is what Jesus is talking about. And then if you've ever been in a place where someone's been broken in, like, you just can't really feel settled. Like, I couldn't sleep well. One night my roommates came home late and I woke up and like jumped up and was like, oh my God, it's happening again. The house is being broken into, but it was just them coming home from a party or whatever. So yeah, and I did try to force my emotions of fear at that time. I said, okay, Jesus said we need to feel fear. We've all got this terror. So what I'm going to do is try to find all of the most scary movies I can and watch them alone in the dark in my apartment. I was living in like a mother-in-law suite at that point in Austin. And so I, just horribly scary movies like The Road, that was based on that Cormac McCarthy movie, The Stoning of Sonia, I can't remember her last name, Salo, which is about all these Nazis who kidnap kids and torture them for 120 days. So I just tried to find the movies that I thought would be the most terrifying to me, and I'd watch them at night alone with the lights out, and it didn't do anything. All that happened was I would get really, really cold and really, really dissociative because I was trying to force myself to feel things. And this leads to a larger theme where I feel like with divine truth, what I felt like was I need to feel emotions. It's all about emotions. But now I realize, first of all, you can't force yourself to feel things you don't want to feel. And I didn't want to feel at that point. I just wanted to stay angry. And second of all, divine truth isn't all about the emotions. The emotions come up when you try to live your life in a principled manner. So it's like making choices that are more ethical or moral, that'll automatically bring up emotions. For example, if you decide you want to just be one of the principles of divine truth, so there's 5 main principles: love, truth, humility, which means feeling all your feelings, faith, and action. And action means taking action in line with the first 4 things I just described. So if you want to practice the principle of truth and just be angry, be truthful with everybody you interact with, it's going to automatically bring up feelings of fear because you're going to be freaked out that you are telling people how you really feel. Because a lot of times people don't want you to. Just think about when most people say, hi, how are you, at the grocery store, they want you to respond with, yeah, I'm doing fine. How are you? But if you say, hey, I'm having a shit day, it's going to be real awkward. And so that's a form of fear. I feel like it's just like even that awkwardness, you're like, oh God, this is so uncomfortable. So it's not something you have to try to focus. You don't have to focus on the emotions. You have to focus on doing the right thing, is what I found. That, and then uh, emotions will come up as a matter of course.
Right. Interesting. Hmm.
Hmm.
Let's see. I kind of
Well,
want to
and let
go
me
more.
just,
Yeah, go ahead.
can I just add to that? I feel like
Yeah.
this is a big problem in the US. This is part of the reason I started my podcast, is that the people I knew in divine truth in the US, they're very focused on, I just got to feel, it's all about emotions. And they're not focused on how they are behaving in their own life. Like, they're not focused on the principles. They're just focused on, I cried an hour last night, so I must be progressing. It's not, there's this big, it's almost competitive. And a lot of times I was criticized and shut out of divine truth communities in the US because I was so angry. But I think the difference between me and most people is that I was just more honest about it. And that there's a lot of rage in America because we're all very entitled because we're pretty spoiled and we have access to most anything we want whenever we want it, even if we're poor in the US. So there's a lot more anger than people want to admit, especially in the divine truth community, which attracts a lot of new age types. And in the new age, anger is seen as unevolved and um, something that people are really critical of.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about where you were at this time. So you're in Austin, which is like, they say keep Austin weird or something down there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and you
Great
were
city.
you are an interesting personality to be a very artist lady and with an interesting background, Christianity and atheism, and
Mm.
you're trying to be an artist yourself, and you
Hmm.
became somewhat successful in that, right?
Yeah, yep. So I was on a mission to prove that I could be a successful, financially successful artist. And I grew up a business of painting murals where I started off like at the bottom, like taking my ladder on the bus and my paint on the bus, and then going to this local free graffiti wall and painting, and then selling T-shirts and prints of my artwork, and just picking up gigs here and there. My first gig was this lady came and picked me up and drove her to her house, and I painted this mural on her house, and then in exchange she fed me lunch. And so yeah, I started off with barter, and I was freelancing animation at that time, so that's kind of what kept me going. That was my bread and butter. And yeah, I was kind of, you know, just this really, I was living like a kind of a scrappy life, and I had like long dreadlocks that had been dyed blue and pink on the ends, and I just kind of, yeah, I don't know, I was still very rebellious, and but I was just determined to make it work, to be an artist. And I realize now the addictions that were in that, because I've always felt pretty badly about myself. And I thought that if I could make it as an artist, I would feel better about myself. And I did finally, quote unquote, make it where I was making good money, making six figures, painting murals. And I had recognition in the city of Austin. I wasn't like the top mural artist by any means, but people knew me. I had a style that was recognizable. A couple of people tattooed my art on their bodies. So I had kind of made it, and it didn't make me happy like I was planning on it was going to do. But yes, I was very determined. I had a lot of tenacity. I think I still do. That's one of my good qualities is I'm a go-getter. And so that was kind of my art journey. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So it sounds, I think I'm kind of putting it together here. So you're in
Mm.
Austin, you're like, damn it,
Hmm.
I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it, there's a lot of starving artists out there. I'm not going to be one of them. Um,
Right.
and you did make it, and you felt like this was going
Hmm.
to get you to a point of happiness and joy. And I'm sure you felt some, joy from doing I mean, you enjoyed
Yeah.
it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoyed the painting process, but it didn't fill the gaping hole I had inside of myself. I do feel like part of my personality does enjoy visual art. And it was something that was always good at when I was a kid. And it's a way I love to express myself. And because I put so much time and effort into it, I got really good at it. But I was using it to try to avoid some feelings of worthlessness, and also to prove things. There were people who told me I couldn't do it, and it was an angry response to them.
Interesting.
Mm.
Okay, so do you see yourself like there was a point when you said, "Oh, I am making it, and I'm actually
Mm.
doing pretty well financially, but I'm not
Hmm.
as happy as I thought I would be. What's next?"
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It happened. I got this really big job. It was my first five-figure job. Um, and it was on this famous building in South Congress, Austin. It was on this boot shop where people, Austin's it's a city in Texas, so cowboy boots are kind of a thing. And it was this big tourist spot. And I painted this mural, and I just felt really on top of the world for maybe 24 to 48 hours afterwards. And then I felt extremely depressed because that feeling didn't last. Because that was my I've made it moment. Like, I painted on the side of Alan's boots, like, and I made a lot of money doing it. And yeah, it just was that was kind of the first realization I had. And I want to say, yeah, but I painted for several years afterwards. And yeah, and then I went through a period where 2020, with COVID hit, most of my clients dropped off on me because the first thing you got to cut in your budget when money's not coming in is art. And I made $14,000 that year, which is not a lot when your rent's, $1,000 a month. I was living in a tiny little spot, so I had cheap rent, but and I got a PPP loan. That's how I made it. But I was like, oh man, like I was starting to do better, and then I had that really terrible year, and that was kind of a dark night of the soul type period, and I really wanted to give up and get a regular job or go back into animation, and I didn't. And that's when I really started to make good money, with the year after that. And yeah, eventually it got to a point where I bought a house, and that I also thought was going to make me happy and make me feel like I wasn't this kind of loser, flighty artist type freak. Like, look at me, I've got a house, I'm making good money. Like, I was hoping that society would recognize that, and I would, and again, feel better about myself, but it didn't. And at that point, I had been visiting Australia more regularly. My first visit was 2019, but I had gone maybe 2 or 3 times since then. And then I realized that if I really wanted to be happy, I was going to have to focus on the spiritual part of my life, and I'd have to focus on my choices that were bad and out of harmony and love, and my relationship with God, which I had been avoiding. And the best way for me to do that was to be around people who were like-hearted and like-minded in that aspect. And that's when I decided to move to Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was yeah, 2023 you made that decision.
Correct. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Mm.
And I kind of gave up all of that glory. I got a lot of glory for being a muralist, like street art community is seen as really cool, like you're a cool person. If
Hmm.
because I used to paint on the streets. I regret that because I don't think it's good to vandalize property, and I got arrested and put in my place. But um, I went from that to moving to a really small town in Australia, and I thought, God, I've been running away from growing up in a small town, and now I'm back in a fucking small town. And also, if I wanted to stay in Australia longer than 3 months, which is the length of a tourist visa, I was going to have to go back to school. And I was so sick of academia, having had my master's, and I wanted to be a more practical person. And I thought, if I do get sent back, I want to have some skills. So I'm going to go to carpentry school. And I kind of had this laissez-faire attitude about it. I'm like, I'm going to go to carpentry school. I'm going to drive a truck and swing a hammer, and it's going to be real wholesome and fun. And I realized actually it was going to be such a challenge because it wasn't something I could figure out with my intellect, which is how I succeeded academically. And it was going to bring up a lot of issues about how I felt around men, because the carpentry industry is dominated by men. And it was also going to remove me of all the glory I had. Like, no one gave a fuck in Australia that I was some sort of mural artist in Austin, Texas. They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And also, I was getting older. Like, all the people in my class were in their 20s. I started when I was 38. And I think people generally thought I was like this old weirdo who was listening to Jesus, these people called Jesus and Mary Magdalene, this old American weirdo. And yeah, so all these feelings of feeling like a weirdo and a freak came rushing back, and all of those had been kind of covered up by my career in Austin. You know, being a street artist, people thought I was cool. I was constantly at parties and art gallery openings and stuff. I never, yes, I was able to insulate myself from those feelings. And then when I gave that up and moved to Australia, all of those things just smacked me in the face.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So you're kind of seeing
Mm,
how, when you're wanting to feel some of these emotions that you've been like pushing really far down, like you get opportunities where that happens. I mean, that's something that I've noticed for myself.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's kind of like a prayer, isn't it, Theo? Like if you really want something, that's a prayer. And if it's in line with like God's laws, you're gonna be given situations or people are gonna come into your life to trigger those feelings.
yeah, yeah. I'll just say a quick anecdote on that point.
Please
Um, like a month ago, I was like, God, give me something really tough.
be careful what you wish for.
I know. I was like, give me something that, I know I don't want right now, and something I'd really hate you for, or something. I don't know what it was, a weird prayer. But and like recently my life has been really difficult. Like I've lost a lot of respect at work,
Mm,
and suicidal emotions I've had for a long time have reared their
mm-hmm,
ugly head.
mm-hmm,
All kinds of stuff. And I just realized today, actually, I'm like, oh, I remember when I was like asking for hard things. And I shouldn't say like, I don't know if I'm phrasing that right, but it's like I just realized all of a sudden that this is kind of like the hard stuff that I've been wanting to have, I guess.
mm. Yep. Ask and you shall receive. Yeah. Yeah, I totally feel that. And can we talk about suicide a little bit? Because it's something I've had personal experience with, and I don't feel like it's talked about enough. But
Yeah.
before I found divine truth, I was suicidal. I would say I was suicidal, meaning I was thinking about killing myself every day. And for a period of that started in my teens and ended about 15 years later. So during the tail end of that, I found divine truth, like in my late 20s. And one of the things that is taught in divine truth is that when you have suicidal feelings, it's because you're angry. Typically, you're angry about where your life is at and how things have turned out, or you're angry about some feelings. And that was so strange to me because you always hear, oh, if you're suicidal, you must be really sad or really
Right.
depressed. And what you find with divine truth is that depression is actually, you're really mad. You're so mad, but you don't even want to feel that you're mad. Like that's how shut down you are. And it's a very dark place to be in when you're suicidal. And as somebody who, again, was suicidal every day, meaning I thought about it every day for 15 years, it's like a kind of like a hell that you're in where you feel like you're in this deep, dark trench and you can't get out of it. And the suicide feels like it's your savior because you can just kind of check out on the shitty life that you have. And I'm always really thankful to Divine Truth and the therapist I had in Austin because I just started to try to connect to my anger and I got a pair of boxing gloves and I just started hitting shit with them like every morning for 45 minutes and trying to do again in the evening. And it really helped a lot to just kind of break me out of that numb, dark place. But I just wish there was more truth about suicide on Earth because I think what most people do is they get put on medication and um, everyone should make their own choices about what they ingest. So I don't have any judgment there, but it really, if you can focus on anger with suicide, to me, I found that to be very, very fruitful.
Mm. Yeah, for myself, I will say, like, logically, it makes a lot of sense. Emotionally,
Mm,
I don't want that to be the truth, that it's really related
right.
to anger. Because like in my mind, it's all like I'm totally justifying the desire to check out. I think
Hmm.
that I shouldn't have to. It's not really emotions, is what I think. It's not. it's not these hard emotions that I don't want to feel. It's just that God didn't make a good system. God
Right.
forgot about me.
Hmm.
He screwed up on Theo, and he wants to make my life hard for some reason. So there's no way out. Um,
Hmm.
that's those are some of the feelings that I have. But basically, I justify my anger. I remember AJ saying recently, like I call him AJ by the way, but I remember him saying recently, like you're angry at other people. Would is that true, or is it anger at yourself? Suicidal feelings.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's both. And I think it's also God, like you're just saying, like I was talking earlier about how I've made these assumptions about God that aren't true, that he's kind of a nasty character. And it's I've had the same feelings you've had, that like God screwed me over, you know. The situation I'm in is because of God. And it doesn't make any logical sense that God would be nice to everybody, but be vindictive
Right.
with you and I, Theo, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at everything else in God's universe, like nature, for example, it's not like that. God is consistent. So we choose to bash God because we prefer to do that than to bash or like get angry at the people who have hurt us, or to face the how we've hurt other people. So I think it can be both anger with yourself or anger with other people that you want to avoid, and then that's when you go with anger to God, because God is not going to attack you. He's not going to gaslight you. He's not going to really respond to your anger, so it's kind of safe.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And I just I get how shitty that is to feel suicidal, but it often comes up. It often came up for me when things weren't working out in my life, and I just wanted to get to check out. Yeah, and I felt also very justified in it, but it's really futile to. You're not going to get anywhere with that, because that's not how the system that God made works. And I believe that the people who do commit suicide, it's they arrive in a really painful place. Um, in the spirit world. And it's also very spirit influenced. People who don't know about spirits, they're basically people who've died and passed on, that they're ghosts, whatever you want to call them, that are around. And there are spirits who want people to commit suicide because they get sick pleasure from it, you know? And if you have any connection to spirits, and you're feeling suicidal, they're going to egg that on. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's happening with you, Theo.
Yeah.
Meaning that you're getting spirit influenced as well.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. That whole discussion about spirits, um, I'm a little confused on. I don't know how to say that that's true. I've had some spiritual experiences, but nothing where I've seen a spirit that I can remember. More like in my sleep state, some pretty notable experiences. But it's hard for
Mm.
me to be open to the idea that there are spirits, although it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that the spirits with you kind of prefer for you to not really be open or be unaware of their existence, because then they have a lot more power over you. Um, spirits with malevolent intentions, like to try to get someone to commit suicide or be stuck in a rut. They kind of prefer to be in the shadows, and they have less power if they're called out.
Yeah,
And
and I
they
wonder.
can cause brain fog. Like even just us talking about it, I can feel you, like, I don't know, like just kind of getting foggy about the whole thing, and your tone of voice has changed. And um yeah, so spirits have influence over our lives that most of us aren't aware of. I know I'm not, and I've had a lot of education about it, fortunately.
Have you found yourself able to like detect when you're communicating with spirits or they're communicating with you?
Yeah, 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 I have. I have a history of schizophrenia in my family, And when I was a little kid, I would hear voices. I think most people would say it's just like you're having thoughts. But to me, it felt when I was little like that it wasn't my thought, but it was, and just a voice in my head, I guess. And I remember being really upset about it and going to my dad and freaking out and being like, Dad, like I keep having all of these voices and I don't know what to do. And I just remember he calmed me down. And then I was probably in like second grade then. And then I just got really involved in school and became like an overachiever. So I didn't hear voices anymore. And then when I was in my 30s and I wanted to give up addictions, and I had finally given up on marijuana and I'd given up on alcohol. And we didn't really go much in alcohol, but I drank a lot. They came back in the voices. And luckily, I found a therapist. I came to her and I said, like, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm hearing voices. And she said, I don't think you have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality or disorder. I just think you have some trauma. And let's book you in for 3 times a week. So I saw her for 3 times a week for 2 years. And because we were able to get into some things that I was avoiding with my anger in therapy, the voices went away. So some people are more open to spirits than others, and I'm one of those people. And a lot of those people get become institutionalized or put on medication because in our Western society, it seems you're sick if you're hearing voices, and where other societies, shamanic societies, you're seen as like the spiritual leader of your community. But yeah, I think everybody is influenced by spirits. I think oftentimes, ancestors or relatives that loved ones who've died before who are looking over you, that kind of thing. And that when it's not dealt with, it can turn into and marijuana is involved. It can turn into schizophrenia or mental illness really fast.
Mm. Schizophrenia meaning like what does that mean to you?
Gosh, I don't have like the DSM definition of on it on hand, but I think schizophrenia is like having delusions, out of touch with reality, hearing voices,
Yeah.
paranoia. I think of a lot of people with schizophrenia think that people are out to kill them or the FBI is after them. And I saw it with a lot of people smoking weed. You get really paranoid, and you're not in touch with reality.
Right. But like I think AJ would say like you are just hearing like nasty spirits, really.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I defined it by society's definition, but yeah, you're somebody who's
Yeah.
open, you're kind of mediumistic person, and you've got emotions you don't want to feel, you've got trauma, and so then you're surrounded by nasty spirits, and you just feel like you're going insane.
Yeah. Because of
Yeah.
course like there's mediumship, which is where you are like totally permitting like spirit communication. Um
Hmm.
it sounds like when you were referring to schizophrenia before, you were saying like it's the bad kind of communication.
Yeah, well, it's just you don't aware. It's like when a medium sits down, I'm going to channel the spirit. They know what they're doing. They know that this is another person they're talking to who's invisible. Where when you're schizophrenic, you just feel like there's all these thoughts in your head that are really whacked out and you don't understand it. And you just feel like
Yeah.
you're going insane. Whereas medium or a psychic, whatever you want to call it, or a channel, they feel like they're just communing with the spirit world. Or Christians feel like they're in touch with the Holy Spirit because Christians think that talking with spirits is a sin, but it's okay to talk to the Holy Spirit or commune with the Holy Spirit. But in reality, spirits are just they're people, so there's going to be nice ones and there's going to be bad ones and there's going to be everybody in between, and nobody's beyond redemption. So um, it's just going to be like in real life, you're going to attract people based on your soul condition, and the same is with the spirits that are around you. So if you feel like shit about yourself, it's likely you're going to attract a lot of people and spirits that agree with you.
Right. Um, well, if you don't mind, unless you want to go further into that, I was wondering if you could go back to 2019 when you first decided to go to Australia.
Yeah, sure. So I decided to come out of my shell and go to Australia. I met some people in Texas who were interested in Divine Truth too, and had been listening for a while, and connected with them, and even roomed with one of them over. We shared a hotel suite with each other at the venue that Jesus and Mary had booked. And yeah, I went to a talk, like some of the talks that you see on their YouTube channel. It was about sin, actually. And at one point, somebody organized like a little get together by the hotel pool, and Jesus and Mary were there. And that's when I sat down and talked to him a little bit. And I told him that I felt like Divine Truth was a pain in my ass. And yeah, just briefly. And then the person I was staying with had known Jesus and Mary for a while. So they came over another time just to chat with her and catch up with her. And as they were about to leave, I just stopped them and I said, "Hey, do you have any feedback for me?" Like at this point, I'd just been a wallflower. And they talked to me for 7 minutes. I know because I recorded it, and just told me all of the things about them that they could sense were my biggest problems, really. Because Jesus and Mary, because they felt through a lot of their unhappy emotions. They are not so emotionally stunted like the rest of us, and they can feel people and they can understand what people are going through, even if they've never met them before, you know? And so they pointed out to me that I was really angry, and I was really angry about because I really liked truth, and I was feeling like I had to conform to society's hatred of truth, and also that I had a deep, deep hopelessness where I felt like it's interesting because this is going back to the suicide topic, and I don't feel like you're keen to talk about this again, but I'm going to. Is that yeah, just I felt very hopeless, like nothing was ever going to work out for me. Like I was never ever going to be happy. Other people could be happy, and that's fine and good, but for Helena Martin, um, that was never going to happen, and usually life just turns to shit.
Right. So definitely they were exposing some of the anger issues,
Mm-hmm.
and hopelessness, which is very much
Mm-hmm.
related to anger. Um,
Well, it can be. There's two types of hopelessness. There's a hopelessness that you have in an addictive way, where you feel, oh, this is so hard, I'm not going to do it anymore, I give up. That's addiction. That's like an anger-based hopelessness. And then there's also hopelessness where um that's kind of more of a grief, where you feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's really sad. But yeah, I definitely think that you're right. There's a lot of anger and hopelessness, but there is hopelessness that's because Jesus has explained to me that there is hopelessness that is like grief based.
hmm, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Well, so you actually went down there. Was that a big
Mm-hmm.
deal for you to make that decision, or is that kind of normal for Helena?
No, it was big. I hadn't been a world traveler, you know. The year before, I decided to travel internationally to Vietnam, and I did a road trip across the U.S., and it was all very scary for me. So that kind of primed me for the experience I was going to have in 2019. But yeah, I felt very nervous about the whole thing. But I was so glad I did. So glad I did go. And I met some of the people that I'm friends with now. Yeah. Yeah, and I would highly recommend, if you've been listening to Divine Truth, anybody listening here who's been listening to Divine Truth, go to a talk. Jesus and Mary are going to be touring the US, annually now, and they're going to North Carolina this year, 2025, and meeting them in person, asking a question, getting feedback, it really helps your personal progress a lot, because something that you've been praying and trying to figure out by journaling or going to therapy for, a year could be told to you in, a 2-minute conversation with Jesus and Mary, because they can just feel what's going on with people. So, I didn't know, I knew I was really angry. I didn't know why. And I wasn't really aware that I was hopeless. Although when they told me, I was like, oh yeah, I am hopeless. And I do have this fucking painful feeling in my chest. It was right in my sternum, and I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know what it was about. And I do kind of have a pessimistic view of the future. And I do feel like things are never going to work out for me. But it wasn't something that I could articulate so succinctly. So it's really invaluable. Getting feedback is such a gift. It really cuts through the bullshit, and helps you really quickly.
Do you mind if I add to that?
Sure.
I generally I think about what AJ says about like how well, of course we know that AJ and Mary are human. They aren't God. And God is someone you could pretty much access whenever, although AJ and Mary in their physical form you definitely can't access whenever. Um,
Hmm.
I've done some experiments myself where I like think of all these things I want to ask AJ or Mary, and then I'll just be
Hmm.
like, why don't I just ask God? And
That's cool.
I've had some really interesting results with that. Um, I've
Oh
actually had
yeah.
some. Oh yes, yeah. Like I've had some times where I've had answers like immediately, and times where like well now I'm thinking there could be spirits, but that could just be doubt. But I've had some really interesting answers, and I think there is something to that. Like I just want to add and say like God, if you're very desirous, wants to help you with your problems.
I agree, and I think it is important to have discernment of whether you're talking to God or spirits, because I think oftentimes if we have a feeling that we had a situation where we were doubting if we acted in a loving manner or if it was the other person who was unloving, and we want to ask about that, but if we have a feeling inside of ourselves that is, please don't tell me I was in the wrong here, you'll be answered by a spirit to tell you, no, you were a good person in that scenario. It was the other person's problem. So it's based on your desire, not necessarily intellectual thought. And so I think it's always really good to examine like who we're talking to, because a lot of spirits are glad to play God to people. It gives them a sense of power, or they feel like, oh, I want to help this person out, and if they think I'm God, it's no big deal, like as long as I'm helping them. But that's not really helpful because you're not being truthful to the person. So I think it's really important, to examine: is this a spirit or is this God?
Mm. Hmm. All right. Um,
Mm.
so let's see here. So if we go forward in the timeline back to like 2023 and you're now in
Okay.
Australia,
Hmm.
you found a place to stay and you set yourself on this course to learn carpentry.
Yep.
Um, and you are, may I ask like how close you are? Because I know you involve yourself with some of the activities with God's Way.
Yep.
Is that right? So how close are you to that to the God's Way work?
So God's way has a hierarchy, just like everything in God's universe, where Jesus and Mary are the founding members, and then below them are the original members and succession members that make up, who are directors. So there's three directors. So that's Eloisa Sparks, Phoebe Bruce, and Cornelius. And then below them are the regular old members. So there's a few of those. I am a God's Way member. And then below them is the volunteers. So that's if you want to volunteer. And then um, if you want to come to humility practice days and you show like a dedication. And then below that is participants. So if you just rock up to a humility and practice day, you're not a volunteer yet. You are considered a participant. And then you go through a 6 month probation period. And if you want to become a volunteer, and then you can go on probation to be a volunteer. Um, so yeah, that's just an outline of the hierarchy of God's way. So yeah, I would say that pretty close. Um, I've got a lot of sin, and I'm not a very humble person, but God's Way is an organization I'm very passionate about because it's basically a practical day-to-day playing out of what divine truth is. So divine truth is a lot of, it's the teachings of Jesus and Mary, but if you want to see what that looks like in day-to-day life, that's where God's way comes in. And that's why I'm always keen on telling people about God's way, because when you go to Jesus and Mary's seminars, you're hearing divine truth, which is great. But if you come to Australia and participate in Humility and Practice Day, you can see how your addictions are playing out in day-to-day life. Like, because a lot comes out when you're trying to work with other people or be part of a team or get a job done. And so, yeah, I really am keen on God's way, and I'm really proud to be a member, which just happened like less than a month ago.
Cool. So that's something I mean, if you've been involved for that long, it's definitely something you had wanted, right?
Yeah, it's something I really want. And so, yeah, I'm a probationary member, so it means I've got like a 6-month trial period, and uh, yeah, I'm somewhat limited in my time for God's way because I go to school and I have a job um, working for a builder in Kingaroy, which is the biggest city in this area. But I really enjoy the people at God's way. Jesus he picks, I think, most of the people in God's way, but Jesus and Mary have picked the directors, the people they feel who are most in line with God's way. And so there are fearless leaders, and they're lovely people who um, are happy to give, feedback and help everybody who comes to the Humility and Practice Days. And when Jesus and Mary leave, so they travel, 4 to 5 months a year. God's way keeps going, and we've got a lot of goals and missions for the organization that were kind of dreamed up by Jesus and that we're trying to execute. And it's really cool. It's a lot about being responsible for one's own water. So there's a lot of emphasis on growing our own food and catching our own water. And then a lot of emphasis on having a relationship with God. Like, that is the most important thing. Like, if people can sort that issue out, become a more loving person, then everything else will follow.
Okay, so you live in Kingaroy then?
Oh, yeah,
Mm.
just outside. I'm in the suburb outside. Yep.
Okay. Um, and then let's see. Um, I want to ask you more about God's way because I know you're passionate about it, but I also want to ask you
Yeah, I love God's way.
about like we talked in our pre interview chat about some things you
Mm-hmm.
might want to talk about, and I know one thing on your mind recently has been sin. Is there anything you want to
Mm-hmm.
say in that regard? I know that's one of the first what is it? Help. I forget the name of the type of meeting you went to in 2019, but that was to do with sin, and that was a big important talk, right?
Yeah, so I went to a seminar about awakening to one sin in 2019. And what I've noticed about myself and other people when they first hear divine truth is there's an incredible amount of emphasis on focusing on how other people have hurt us, especially in our childhood or just in our day-to-day life. But I found that the only time that I've really made progress, meaning becoming a more loving and ultimately happier person, is when I focused on where I'm being an asshole or where I am sinning. And it's a lot harder to realize and come to terms with the bad things that I've done as opposed to how the bad things that have been done to me. But I think it's really important to focus on that because that's where God can help us the most.
Right, because especially if you're trying to work through some of your personal issues, it's a
Mm-hmm.
very I want to say trendy, but might not be the best word, but it feels trendy to talk about your trauma. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also sin, which can you describe what sin is, and can you describe what happens when you do sin?
Um, I believe the way Jesus and Mary define it is missing the mark of love. the way I see it is having bad feelings that lead me to doing bad things. So a good example of sin is anger. Anger is never justified. I mean, maybe little kids being angry for being abused, that probably is, but as so I guess I couldn't say that all anger is unjustified, but just anger is a emotion to it keeps me away from emotions I don't want to feel. They call it a capping emotion. And it hurts other people. Like we were talking about earlier, if you're trying to work with somebody and they're pissed off because of something that has nothing to do with you, you're still going to be walking on eggshells the whole day. And it feels really unpleasant. So, yeah, that's one of the biggest sins I'm dealing with now. I think, and what most people think about when they think about sin is just actions, like, oh, you have a gambling addiction and you've gambled away your son's college education. That's a sin, but it's really the motivation to sin, or the origin of the sin is the actual sin. It's the feeling. So if you have a feeling that you want to not deal with your life, you might gamble. So the gambling is just an effect, and the feeling of not wanting to deal with your life is the cause, and that's the sin. So so for me, with the anger example, it's like I'm using anger. The anger is a fact. The sin is not wanting to be humble. Um, but for it's helpful to see the effects and examine the effects and think about the effects and journal the effects and ask other people about how they've been affected by my own anger. And I found all these things helpful. Um, but it's just a painful process because you feel kind of shitty about yourself. And if you try to talk to people about it, they tell you that you're being too hard on yourself and to stop doing that. And but I feel like it's the only thing that's been helpful to me, really helpful to me. Like when I've had conflict with people, instead of pointing the finger at them and saying, you are being a jerk right now, looking at myself is the most helpful thing. And but so I'm at a point now where I still sin, but it bothers me. So I'm still resorting to anger when I feel other people aren't being very nice, instead of feeling those feelings, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, yeah, it does, definitely. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm kind of wanting to lead you to this interesting thing where, if I say, oh, my life is messed up, I was really traumatized when I was a child. I still
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of traumatic after effects of what happened to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when there's also this thing about sin, which a lot of people don't want to look at, where there is a feedback to sin as part of God's laws, right?
Oh, you mean like you reap what you sow?
Well, I guess there's pain that occurs when you
Yeah,
sin.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. When your conscience starts bothering you, you know, you start thinking, oh God, I've been a jerk. I've been really focused on how people have hurt me and how people have been a jerk to me. But what about Helena? Like, where have I been a jerk? You know? And I think most people would look at my life, or most people would know me, like I'm a pretty friendly, cheerful person, and they wouldn't think that I'm this sinful person. But from God's perspective, I am. God has very high standards. And if you look at the standards on earth, most people think that they're good people. But it doesn't really reflect the state of our society right now, our world society. The world is riddled with wars, environmental devastation, inequality, you name it. So if everybody was a pretty good person, I think the world would be in a lot better state. But because we have this different standard of what it means to be good, which is much lower than God's, it allows most people to be delusional about the amount that they sin.
Hmm. What else has been coming up for you lately? Like, why is your
Mm.
yeah, with in regard to this topic?
To sin, yeah. Intergender issues. being in the carpentry industry, it's very male dominated. So a lot of feelings about feeling worthless around men, um, which leads to me to be sinful against men because I'm like, why don't you like me, guy in my carpentry class? Like, just like me, which is like this demand, and then trying to prove myself, prove my worth out of trying to, work harder or um, I guess be competitive, race basically, with carpentry. Um, and yeah, a lot of that is um, intergender stuff. And Jesus emphasizes intergender issues a lot. And I can see why, because it's almost like women and men feel like they're different species or something. Like men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And, and I feel much more comfortable in the company of women. And it's just because we live in a society that the qualities that males have in more abundance are exalted, and the qualities that females have are diminished. So, men have more physical strength, and they're more in touch with the intellect than females are. And those physical strength and intellectual strength are what are valued in almost every society I've visited or been a part of, and females are more connected to spirituality and emotions, which are not valued in any society that I've been a part of. So it's led to this feeling that women aren't worth as much, and it serves neither men nor women, you know, and it just leads to this separation between the sexes, because I think a lot of women, by the time they get my age, they're pretty bitter about the state, how men are, and then men are like, oh, why are these women are just bitter and resentful? Like, what do I want to do with that? So it's just this horrible feedback loop. Um, and then women have sons, and then they think, I can't stand this person I'm married to because of all my issues with men. So I'm going to groom my son to be the perfect man. And then that son feels like he's super special and a prince. And then he grows up and the cycle continues, So it's this horrible exchange between the sexes that plays out. It gets people confused about their sexuality, even. And whereas it seems to me logically, God would have made the sexes equal. And there's just a lot of animosity between the sexes on both sides.
Yeah. You brought up so many interesting points there, and I want to like tug at every single one of them, but I think that would be like 2 hours. Um, should I just throw one out or
Please.
okay? Well, one thing you brought up a lot earlier, in your response just there was, or I should say at the beginning of what you just said, you notice yourself feeling worthless around men, and then you notice a
Mm,
demand coming out of you towards a man that you may perceive is kind of like either condescending to you, or it's just something that may be coming from you where you're not getting the
mm,
attention you want. Do you
mm-hmm.
feel the demand like shoot out from you, or do you just see your actions and then you kind of come to regret it later? Like maybe you say, "Hey, Derek, how's it going?" Like you want to like butter him up a bit to get him to notice you or something, or what?
Yeah, I would say it's more like I don't notice it while it's happening. It's more like you said, the latter, where afterwards I'm like, oh, like I can reflect on it and be like, oh yeah, and sometimes it's not trying to butter someone up, it's just trying to get somebody to not hate you. Like, I definitely feel like at school there's people who are like, why are women here? They shouldn't be here. Like you shouldn't be here. So just kind of to be tolerated almost. But yeah, then there is like trying to be, overly friendly, be like, hey, like I know you don't want me here, but I'm not so bad. Like, how you doing, Derek? Like, how's your day going? Like
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
a woman, and so I know you think that I'm probably, I shouldn't be here. but I'm not so bad for a woman.
Yeah. And
Yep.
you,
And
that,
then
that,
that's a demand. That's a demand. And then the guy's like, oh God, like, I want this chick to just like leave me alone. Like, like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It also must not feel good to kind of try to play this part where you don't feel like you can be yourself. Like you're almost like willfully condescending yourself so that he could feel good about you or something. Does that sound right or no?
Yeah, well, luckily, like I was saying about, because I had the physical safety in my childhood, I'm less shut down to my personality, I guess, than people in the same circumstances or the same age as me. So I try not to mute my personality. And I do have this kind of bubbly, really expressive, extroverted personality. So I think sometimes when I am doing that, hey Derek, how you doing thing, it's genuine, but it's not always welcomed. And then I'm like, then that's when my sin comes in, where I'm like, why don't you, like, I'm just being myself here. Like, how come you don't like that? Like, and that's where yeah, that's where the sin comes in. But yeah, I think sometimes it's fake, especially if I feel like someone's angry with me or irritated with me. I think that's what a lot of women do, when they feel like, well, sometimes you can feel like you're in danger, that a man might get violent with you if you um, don't fawn over him.
Right. I've heard a lot about how women will nurture men, and I've been hearing it recently in
Hmm.
some recent talks, and I'm starting to notice it everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, you just did it! Like a woman will be like saying something to me, and they'll say like,
Hmm.
oh, you were so good just there. What you just did, that was so awesome. And I'm like, oh my God, they just like there it is. That's what it is. Um,
That's really
and
good that you noticed that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And people think
yeah.
that's just being a good woman.
Yeah, and it's not, right?
Yeah.
It's actually just a total lie. And I don't say that to disparage women. I'm like for myself, I've never known that crippling fear, I want to say, where like it's different. I have my own fears with women, but I haven't
Hmm.
felt that I had to like nurture someone out of anger, I
Hmm.
guess.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
out of a like do a full frontal, compliment assault. Um,
Hmm.
so that they wouldn't get angry at me. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I see it a lot now, and it's really interesting. But another point, another string I wanted to tug on, unless
Hmm.
you have something you want to say to that.
No, no.
Okay, another one was so AJ and Mary are they talk after the humility and practice days, right?
Yeah, a lot of times they'll join us for lunch. So we'll finish up work and we'll have lunch and they'll wander out and start talking to us. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
some people
Well,
have put those talks up on Spotify. Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes it can be 4 to 5 hours long.
Yeah. Yeah. On a Saturday, we typically stop earlier in the day. We stop at like 12:31. So and then Jesus and Mary will talk till 6:30 sometimes. Yep.
So that's how I found you. I was listening. A friend of mine told me about some of these talks on Spotify, and I've been listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found your Born in the USA podcast, which I want to get to at some point. But
Mm-hmm.
I heard them say recently in one of these talks, which I recommend people listen to, that there was one participant where they had mentioned she was trying very hard to prove herself. And ever since I heard that, that really like opened, like it turned a light on inside of me because I think that's
Mm.
some big thing that I do, and
Mm.
they said that it's definitely a sin and it doesn't help. Is there anything that you can say to expand on that?
Yeah, I would say that is a big theme in Christianity. And even if you weren't raised a Christian, if you didn't go to church, even if you grew up in a Western country, you're going to have some Christian principles that are part of your belief system just because it's in the air that we breathe, especially in America, which has got the most Christians of any other country in the world. And it's this idea that you can earn love. Like proving yourself is like trying to yeah, trying to earn love, but that's not, love is a gift. Like Jesus and Mary, they Jesus loves me even if I'm being a dick, you know? Like that's if a true if you really love someone, if you love a friend, you're gonna love them even if they're being a jerk to you. It's something you giving either way. It's not because they did something for you. That's barter. So I don't know that specific talk you're talking about, but yeah, trying to prove yourself to me, it just reminds me of being a Christian and feeling like you got to be a good girl or a good boy before God will love you. And I think that a lot of us felt like that way in our childhood. Like if we could sh achieve at school or give our parents what they wanted, like being a good girl or cleaning up or, just making them feel good, then we got praise and that felt like love. So I think that's why a lot of people do that.
Mm. Yeah,
But
I
yeah, you
noticed
resonated with that, huh? Personally, Theo?
totally. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed myself doing it, and I think it's like kind of it's my basic strategy with jobs where I feel like if I can work a little harder, they're not gonna fire me. And I think that goes to like feel some deep-seated fears about rejection. I hate being rejected, which yeah, I'm angry
Mhm.
about it and
Yeah.
I'm totally afraid. So
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is a good segue to talk about intergender issues because I feel like with men, especially more so than women, there's a lot of emphasis on your worth being related to your job or what you do for a living or making a lot of money, basically. Less so with a woman, like you can be a poor artist and still be desirable to a man, is what I found out. Whereas a man, like you've seen, if you're not, you need to be bringing home the bacon, and then you'll become more desirable. So there's a lot of pressure on men to perform, with jobs and stuff like that. That being said, if you are employed by somebody, you're under contract with them, you've made an agreement with them that you're going to do something, you need to follow through on that. But if you have a motivation to do things to try to get worth out of them, that's a sin that needs to be taken care of. And once you deal with that, you can still perform at your job and fulfill your duties, but not have this feeling of like I've got to prove myself.
yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely investigating that issue in my life and I find it very interesting.
Mm.
Um yeah. Intergender stuff. I mean, anything
Mm.
else that's been coming up for you in that regard?
Um, yeah, just wanting to have, part of the reason I was enjoyed that you reached out to me, I was like, oh man, like I'm trying to have more um, friendships with men because like I said, I feel more comfortable in the company of women and I'm more open to truth from women. Um, yeah, just women, and uh, I, I the males, you guys, males and females complement each other. So I think that if I could have more non-romantic friendships with men, that would be a benefit because that kind of softens me to men. I can see that men have been trained and groomed just like women have, but in a different way, that sucks for them. A lot of men are, well, most men I feel are taught not to feel emotions, where it's okay for women to cry. That's a horrible thing to teach a child, and that's a big impediment to one's progress if you can't shed a tear, you feel like you're not allowed to shed a tear. And Men are taught to be competitive and to get their worth from work. So as well. So just kind of having more empathy or maybe more sympathy for men, and just also having more truthful relationships with men as well, not just um, fawning or just saying flattering things or things they want to hear, but also being real with men about stuff as well, just like I would with a female friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in my discussion with you over the phone a month and a half ago or so, you pointed out some things in an email I had sent, and
Mm-hmm.
you noticed, and I didn't notice this, by the way, but you noticed that my tone had changed and you felt like I was sulking. And I'm still working on that.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, that's
like,
part of keeping it real. Like if I want to have, I feel like all my friendships I want to have built on the foundation of truth. So if I if 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 I want to be friends with you, Theo, I want to keep it real with you, and I want you to be real back with me. And if I feel like we're talking on the phone and you're sulking, which is like I would say like a passive form of anger, because I told you something you didn't want to hear, then if I really care about you, I'm going to point it out. Just like I'd point out if your fly was undone or you had a bunch of mud on your face. Jesus has been describing sin as like mud, and it's not something that we need to be judgmental about. We just need to point out to our brothers and sisters, like, hey, you got a dirty face there. Like, you got a booger hanging out of your nose, you know? Um, and it's hard because a lot of times people feel like if they had a critical parent in their childhood or or they don't want to see their own sin, they're going to just feel like it's a pull down or an attack. But and I have these feelings too where I can get offended, not as much anymore, but I can get, gotten really offended when people have pointed things out to me. But now I look back and I feel very thankful that people have pointed things out to me, even if they're hard to hear. And I'm lucky that I have a roommate who's willing to point things out to me where I'm being unloving. And it's really brave because people can get really angry when you point things out to them. And I have gotten angry with her. And uh, you were sulking, like that's anger. And I was like, do I really want to point this out? But you'd asked me. You said you'd asked me if I had any thoughts on our conversation. So I thought that was an opportunity. And I think that that's how we're going to have good relationships with one another if they're built on truth.
yeah. Yeah. A little while ago, I was thinking about the definition of a friend or what my definition
Hmm.
of a friend would be because like I've noticed I don't really have what people would traditionally think are friends. I don't really have many friends, and
Hmm.
I realized I had to write down that one of the things I'd want in a friend is someone that would tell me the truth, even if I didn't want to hear it.
Oh,
um,
yeah.
yeah, so I can see how a love-based relationship would have to have truth as a base as well.
Hmm. Well, I see it a lot with Jesus and Mary because Jesus had had a head start on his progress where he started building his relationship with God years before Mary did. So he's in a better soul condition than her at the moment. So oftentimes he's having to point things out to her, about where she's being unloving. And that's because he loves her, But I think a lot of people are like, oh, he's so nitpicky and critical of Mary. And that's not the truth. It's just that we feel that way because I think because people have been nitpicky and critical with us in the past, or we don't want to hear what people are saying. But I think the more that we can become comfortable with hearing about the bad parts of ourselves, the more likely we'll be able to deal with that and get rid of those things.
Indeed. So I had a one pet question. And you mentioned your roommate recently.
Mm,
I had a roommate for a while, and I would try to feel some emotions, especially like well, yeah, anger and sadness around her, and I really didn't feel like I could do it. I felt like she would judge me, even though she was like rooms
mhm,
away.
mhm,
And I was like, I have to get out of here. I have to find my own place.
mhm,
And now I'm in my own place, and it's still questionable whether I can feel my emotions even here. Um,
mhm, mhm.
but what has been your experience trying to get into some of your stuff while having a roommate? Because let me say one more thing. Because I have heard
Uh-huh.
AJ and Mary say that there's a benefit to having someone nearby in your life who can point things out
Oh,
to you.
100%. 100%. I mean, Jesus has said that it's not good for people to live alone. And he's always recommended to try to get a roommate of the same sex, if you're heterosexual and not try to pick somebody. But unfortunately, I know in women's case, most of us will pick a roommate that we're codependent with. Um, so with my roommate and um, I've noticed I had to get over feelings of, yeah, like what if she's judging me for yelling in my room right now, or I feel really uncomfortable with this, even though we're on separate sides of this house we rent. So yeah, they just, those are just more feelings to go through. And just living with another person. Hey, you don't have control over your environment anymore. When you live alone, you have almost complete control of your environment, and you're not really triggered by things. My roommate and I, um, both have strong opinions, and we're very different. So that's going to lead to disagreements and conflict. And if you can have disagreements and conflict with people and not just want to blame the other person and look at your part in it, your sin in it, I think that's an equation for success. And that's what I've found. And I've realized that I did live alone for many years because I wanted to avoid um, all the things I've gone through with my roommate. And yeah, because if you're having a disagreement with somebody you're living with, there's a lot of tension in the air, right? Like it's just it's
Yeah.
really uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's
So I
that's
feel
kind of
very, very,
recommended.
very thankful to have my roommate's really lovely. She has been willing to be really brave and point things out to me and also look at herself. And I feel very, very thankful. Very, very thankful for her. She's an excellent person.
Uh, So you have like while you're like if you're getting into some grief or even if you're just like angry crying,
Hmm.
you've noticed like, oh, I wonder if she can hear, and then you might say to yourself, oh, I wonder if
Yeah.
she's judging, but then you just try to like go into that.
Yeah, I just feel that. And I'm not crying all the time, Theo. I'm not a very humble person.
Right.
So it's very intermittent, it's more
Yeah.
vibes that she can feel from me, like not hearing my crush, but she can sometimes feel like, oh, Helena, are you angry? Like, what's going on? It's not like she has to hear me hitting, punching something or yelling, but she can just pick up on the vibes. Uh, and I her. Uh, yeah, but it is nice. Sometimes we're both kind of homebodies, so we don't really get the place to ourselves. But I know when we do have the place to ourselves, I think we both feel more comfortable crying. So that does happen on occasion, but you have to get used to not sharing your emotions with other people because that's not good. But going in the your room, and closing the door and feeling what you're feeling, and if someone else hears, you got to deal with that too. And yeah, I think there's a lot of emotions about, oh, this person's gonna, for me, like this person's gonna think I'm weak, or uh this person's gonna be thinking I'm being dramatic or overly sensitive, those kind of things. They have nothing to do with that other person. They have to do probably with things from my childhood. And that's another thing I've noticed is like when I haven't dealt with things, I'll think people are having all sorts of feelings about me that they're not at all. I'm just projecting that because that's been my prior experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I find really interesting. Like I'll be like, oh, that person, I feel like they might be judging me, and it goes from
Hmm.
might to oh, they definitely are, and then like some way I find oh, and they weren't at all because like they weren't even thinking about it, or they're talking, they'll tell me, oh, this is what I was doing for the past 5 minutes, and I didn't even hear you, and
Hmm.
so like what are your own? Because I think like AJ and Mary are pretty good at telling where people are at, but a lot of other people like you and I who are not quite so developed can't necessarily tell. So
I agree. I agree. And again, I think this is something that Jesus said a lot of women do is they get really obsessed about how other people feel about them, where um, men less so, but obviously it still happens, like from your example, like just really, thinking people are judging you. I remember one time I was telling Jesus about how this woman I felt was judging me, and he was like, "Well, how can you tell?" Like how can you tell the difference between someone giving you feedback and someone who's being critical and trying to pull you down? Because you haven't dealt with that feeling. And I agree with what you're saying. It makes you emotionally blind, and that's why it's
right,
so good to focus on your own shit because you really can't tell what's going on until you deal with your own shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, I feel like I would like to go more into like your thoughts on God and other things, but I feel like, I don't know, for myself, I usually go to bed around this time. So I don't know how keen you are to talk more like divine truth stuff or where you want to go from here.
No, I think this is a good time to wrap it up.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, why don't we wrap it up with you talking a bit more about your podcast that you decided to do?
Sure, sure. So, yeah, so I have a podcast. It's called Born in the USA on Loving American Attitudes. There's 4 episodes are up. I've got 2 more in the works, and it's about how Americans specifically, the emotional injuries we have because of the country we grew up in. So there's a lot of emphasis on entitlement, facade, and lack of truth. And I think the podcast is going to evolve over time to just kind of be a podcast about my journey with divine truth. But right now, I'm kind of focusing on those things because I feel like there's not a lot of resources for Americans to use to figure out more about the impediments we have to our spiritual progress. And I wanted to just share, and I always think it's good to share when people, have knowledge, even though I feel unqualified to do so. And I have insecurities about doing so. Yeah. So it's on, all wherever you can find podcasts. And then you can also find it through my website, which is helenasumartin.com.
Okay, and you mentioned the name Born in the USA.
Yeah. Born in the USA, Unloving
Yeah.
American Attitudes.
Okay. Cool. Sorry, I didn't wasn't sure. Yeah, very
No
good.
worries.
I definitely recommend it, and I was very triggered by it because I was reminded of some of the things as an American I don't want to work on. And that's a good thing. um, but yeah, Helena, I appreciate your time today. And I'm gonna try to post this up on my YouTube channel. And yeah, I think it's a real gift that you would offer me your time and your reflections about your life.
Hey, thank you for having me, Theo. And I think that it's really good what you're doing is just sharing yourself. It's when you put yourself out there, especially on the internet where anyone can see it, it's brave and it allows you to make mistakes and kind of just expose yourself and be vulnerable. So kudos to you too, and I hope we keep in touch.
All right. Well, we'll end it there, and I will say goodbye.
All right. Goodbye, Theo.